Mythical Pokemon are a subcategory of legendary Pokemon, and the distinction can sometimes be confusing. Usually mythicals are a bit harder to obtain than regular legendaries. Some are even exclusive to limited time events. Since only recently, I simply referred to all of these Pokemon as legendaries, much to the dismay of my comment section. But I have recently learned the distinction via rigorous research, and I have been feeling very intelligent ever since. Mythical Pokemon are actually illegal to use in official VGC tournaments, since they're not as widely available to all players. But they are legal to use in Smogon's competitive singles formats, and their power levels can vary significantly. Some mythicals are among the best Pokemon in the franchise, performing very well in Ubers among the strongest box legendaries. Some have been metagame defining staples of the OU format for multiple generations in a row, iconic competitive Pokemon that are commonly seen. And some are just frankly bad, barely finding a viable place for themselves in Smogon's lower usage tiers. Some fans consider Muck to be a mythical Pokemon, but this is a very divisive and heated topic that I don't have time to get into here. For now, let's take a look at every single confirmed mythical Pokemon in the franchise, and rank them from worst to best. Subscribe to the channel immediately for your own self-interest. Thank you. The worst mythical Pokemon in the series is Meloetta, a frankly pathetic Pokemon with laughable stats. Many would tell me, Jimothy, this guy shouldn't count, he's only a little fellow. He is not fully evolved. He should not be judged by the standards of other Pokemon here. It's not fair. To that I say that this is a Pokemon that exists. It's classified as a mythical Pokemon by Bulbapedia, and I will be judging it by the same standards. This Pokemon has a set for Gen 8 ZU apparently, where it can use Magnet Pull to trap the Pokemon Kling Clang with this set right here, Acid Armor Thunderbolt, but that's all it can do and it's not very good at it. And the worst thing about Meloetta is that it requires you to play Pokemon Go to obtain it, and that's the real downside of Meloetta. Up next is Phione, also known as Manaphy Jr. Same typing and ability as Manaphy, but strictly worse stats, with 80 across the board in every stat, which is just not very good. It's ranked NU in its debut game of Generation 4. It can be used as a rain setter with the synergy of rain plus hydration being pretty useful, but it also not only has worse stats than Manaphy, it has a more limited move pool without crucial options like Tail Glow and Calm Mind, which really restrict what it can do. But in the lower tiers it can be okay with its pretty good move pool, hydration being a usable ability, and sometimes that is enough. But as far as mythical Pokemon go, it is of course not very powerful. Up next is Meloetta from Generation 5, an unfortunate Pokemon because it's an interesting design, but it sort of just doesn't work very well in practice. Meloetta has a normal psychic typing, which is kind of good in a way because normal typing makes you immune to Ghost, cancelling out one of Psychic's biggest weaknesses. Meloetta also has an interesting mechanic going on with Relic Song, a signature move that will, when used, transform Meloetta into its Pirouette form. And the Pirouette form has normal fighting type and is more physically attack-oriented. Unfortunately, this is not a very good mechanic. I mean, requiring this average special attack of Relic Song to transform into the Pirouette form is a lot to ask, and then once you're in that form, you're kind of just on the same level as many other physical attackers that you could just run in the first place. It's a lot of work to get into that form, and it requires -1 move slot because you obviously can't use Relic Song in the attack form. It's a mechanic that doesn't really work very well in practice or do much. So for that reason, Meloetta is usually used just for its base form, where it does have good stats and a pretty good move pool with options like Calm Mind and various useful special attacks. In its debut game, it's ranked in UU, which is okay. I think it's an alright presence there, but over the years, it got worse and worse as Psychic typing became one of the worst typings you can have, with Dark Weakness and Bug Weakness becoming more of a problem as the years went by. It is at least immune to Ghost, which comes in handy because Ghost Weakness is another reason Psychic typing sucks. You at least don't have that problem, but Meloetta definitely struggles in the later gens as one of the worst mythical Pokemon in the series for sure. It does have a usable niche in balanced Hackmons though, if you're curious about that. I made a video on the topic because a hacked Meloetta with that normal psychic typing has niche uses for its immunities and resistances against other popular threats in that format. But in regular old Pokemon, not so much. Up next we have Diancie, base form Diancie, not Mega Diancie, which will be ranked separately. As for the base form, this is a pretty interesting Pokemon because in its base form it is really bulky with high defense stats, and of course when it Mega Evolves, it has more offensively leaning stats. But if you're just using the base form, it's not great, because Rock Fairy is a pretty exploitable defensive typing. It does have some traits that are pretty advantageous, like the ability Clear Body can come in handy, I suppose. Not the most useful ability, but it's something. Access to Stealth Rock always helps. Diamond Storm is a good move that you get. And Fairy typing is good. Rock typing not so much, but Fairy typing offers useful immunities. But Niantic does not have things like healing or much longevity to offer, so in its base form it is a Pokemon that struggles to really function, tends to be ranked in lower tiers. In its debut game, it was ranked in RU, and I think that later on it only got worse and worse as time progressed. Up next is Hoopa. And Hoopa has two forms. I'll be ranking the other forms separately, but Hoopa's base form is one of the worst mythicals in the series. And it looks pretty good on the surface. It doesn't look too bad, with great stats. I mean, it has 150 base special attack. That is very good, and an excellent base 130 special defense. Also has some interesting moves like Hyperspace Hole, which can bypass protection. Access to Knockoff is always good. And the ability Magician is interesting. If you have no item, you will steal the enemy's item if you hit them with an attack. It's kind of like the move Thief, but on any of your moves. Actually quite an interesting ability. And I've seen some sets on Hoopa that use berries to heal and then be able to activate Magician afterwards for double value. But the real problem with Hoopa is its low base 70 speed and its terrible Psychic Ghost type combination, which makes you times 4 weak to Dark and to Ghost. And that is insanely rough, as Dark and Ghost are incredibly common offensive types, especially in Gen 6 when Hoopa debuted. Hoopa really debuted at a terrible time, because Dark and Ghost both got buffed in Gen 6 since Steel no longer resists them, and they both got great new Pokemon to their name, and Dark types received Knockoff, the best move in the game. So Dark and Ghost type stock was at an all-time high at Gen 6, and it's only gotten better and better over the years. So Hoopa got released at a time where its two most glaring weaknesses are the worst to have ever. So yeah, that's rough for Hoopa fans. And in its debut game, it's ranked in RU, and I think in Gen 9 it's PU or ZU or something. It's quite terrible. Up next, Shaman base form. A pretty nice Pokemon design, a cute little hedgehog fellow, but regrettably hasn't had a fantastic competitive career. It is ranked OU in its debut generation of Gen 4 by technicality, because back in the day it was popular, I suppose because it's a new mythical and people liked using it back then, so it was high on the usage stats, therefore ranked in OU. But in the modern Gen 4 metagame, it is not considered very good, and Monograss typing has some defensive advantages, but generally just an underwhelming and average Pokemon that doesn't achieve much in the metagame. Design-wise, it's also very similar to other mythicals like Celebi, who is also a grass type with Natural Cure and the same stat distribution of 100 base across the board. And from Gen 5 onwards, Shaman would really struggle competitively, only getting worse and worse as power creep rose. Up next is Pecharunt, the new mythical Pokemon from Generation 9. And this Pokemon, in its first game that it ever existed in, debuted in UU, which is pretty average for a mythical Pokemon. This is an interesting guy in some ways. It has the move Malignant Chain, which has a 50% chance to apply toxic poison, and a fantastic 100 power and 100 accuracy. It's a very good move, but its stats are not the best. It randomly has base 160 defense, which is very good, but everything else is 88 across the board, which is of course quite average. It is a little bit difficult to make use of in OU, as there are many steel types that can thwart its attempts at gaming, and it has a horrendous matchup into the most popular Pokemon in the format, King Gambit, who is immune to poison and resists Ghost, and also can just KO the thing, so that's rough for Pecharunt. I think it can be used on certain OU teams, but it needs a lot of support with King Gambit elimination and other such things to pave the way for Pecharunt to spread poison with Malignant Chain. In UU it is decent, but even there are superior mythicals. And Pecharunt can't help but feel like it's pretty average as a mythical Pokemon. Up next is Zarude, who is slightly better than Pecharunt in Gen 9 UU's power rankings, but not by much. Zarude is kind of a weird Pokemon, to be honest. It's a dark grass type with pretty good physical move pool. You've got U-Turn, Knockoff, Power Whip, good stab, good utility, good coverage, and good stats too. 120 base attack, a respectable 105 base speed, and even some decent bulk in the HP and defense department. But where Zarude gets weird is with its ability Leaf Guard. If Sun is active, you cannot be statused, and Rest will fail. I don't know why they did this. Why did they make Rest fail with this? Because Hydration is a comparable ability. Curing status in the rain, if rain is up. But you can use Rest with Hydration to heal yourself and cure the rest. I don't know why they disallowed Leaf Guard Pokemon from doing the same. Wouldn't even be that powerful, to be honest. And this is kind of just an ill-fitting ability on such a Pokemon. It's a fast offensive threat, and it has status immunity if Sun is active. So you got to set Sun and then switch this in, and it can't be statused. I think that on a Sun team, you want to be aggressive and run effects like Chlorophyll and Photosynthesis, not this, which provides a sometimes useful benefit against very specific things with a specific weather condition in play, which is hard to do. So basically the ability is useless. It might come up sometimes, but most of the time it's going to be useless. So you're using Zarude just for its stats and other traits, basically. And in that department, it's outclassed by various others. There's faster Dark type, though. It's like Weavile. There's Meowscarada now, who outclasses the thing completely. And it's not even that fast by Gen 9 standards, which is crazy to say. Over 100 base speed would have been great back in the day, but by modern standards, it's not the greatest. You got to be better than this, especially because you're weak to U-turn, the most common pivoting move in the format, and times 4 bug weakness is generally kind of rough. So Zarude is a weird one. What's also strange about Zarude is it gets the move Jungle Healing, a doubles-focused move that heals you and your ally, and yet it is illegal to use in VGC Doubles, so that's interesting, isn't it? Up next is Celebi, and this is one of the ones I always just called a legendary. Apparently it's a mythical, according to Bulbapedia, so there you go. Celebi is from Generation 2, where it was ranked Ubers in its debut game, and from Gen 3 onwards, it was an OU Pokemon. It's excellent in Gen 3 OU. Unfortunately, in Gen 4 OU, while it's still OU ranked, it struggles in the metagame with its bug weakness, which is now a pretty bad trait, as U-turn exists and is everywhere. The last gen where Celebi would do well was Gen 5 OU, which is pretty impressive in my opinion. That's a high power level format, one of the highest power levels in history, and Celebi exists as a very good check to Keldeo, and a general anti-rain Pokemon with its natural cure, which can cure Scald Burns, and good matchups into popular rain Pokemon like Tentacruel, Politoed, etc. It can set Stealth Rock in the face of Tentacruel and 1v1 it. So I think it's a great Pokemon in Gen 5 OU. It's especially good because it can pivot out against Tyranitar, evading pursuit with Dry Baton Pass, which is a good little tech. But from Gen 6 onwards, it was more of a low-tier Pokemon, struggling to achieve much in higher tiers because not only because of its bug weakness, but Dark and Ghost weakness becoming more and more of a problem as the years went on. So regrettably, Celebi, a former competitive icon, kind of sucks now. It's RU in Generation 9, which is a bit sad to see. Little onion fellow failing to achieve much in the modern world. Sorry, this is Gen 8 actually. It doesn't even exist in Gen 9, which is even more offensive to Celebi Nation. Put him in Gen 9, please. But out of respect, I've ranked you above Zarude for your illustrious career, Celebi, so you can thank me for that. Up next we have Hoopa Unbound. They have freed Hoopa from his confines, and he has now got a lot of arms suspended in the air, which evidently gives him more power. This is a better Pokemon than base form Hoopa, with higher stats, and a bad but not as bad as Hoopa typing of Psychic Dark. In Gen 6, this guy was banned to Ubers for being too powerful, with its excellent wall-breaking potential, but then in Gen 7, it actually wasn't that bad. It was UUBL ranked, not even OU by usage. Probably just because it is kind of slow, and it has that damning ×4 bug weakness, which is always a problem for any Pokemon that has such a trait. It's kind of crazy, because this Pokemon looks like a damn legendary. It not only visually, but its stats are through the roof. 170 base special attack, 160 base attack, impressive bulk, but unfortunately this Pokemon suffers majorly from that bug weakness, and from Gen 7 onwards it would be kind of an average Pokemon. Usable as a wall breaker with support, if you can pivot into it safely and make use of its coverage and other such things, but there tends to be more desirable wall breakers in these metagames that aren't as exploitable on the defensive side and just offer more consistency than Hoopa Unbound. The ability Magician doesn't really come up on this Pokemon either. It's usually just running a choice band for maximum breaking potential, so you probably can use Magician somehow, but I don't know. I don't think that comes up as often. Up next is Zeraora, a rare example of a physically oriented electric type with an actual good electric type physical attack. This guy has Volt Absorb, a great ability, offering electric immunity and healing if struck by an electric move, and has Plasma Fists, which has 100 base power, 100 accuracy, electric type attack. And when used against the enemy, their normal type moves become electric types, so it gives you immunity to them. If you're going to be hit by like a big return or a facade or whatever else, if you hit him with the plasma fists, you will be impervious to such a move. It's a pretty cool concept in my opinion. Zero Aura debuted in Gen 7 where it was regrettably ranked in UU. Not a very popular choice in the format, but in Gen 8, it was ranked OU and it was actually much better. Zero Aura benefited greatly from the addition of boots to the game, which help it as a fast, aggressive Pokemon. Hit the field more times, not worried about Stealth Rock and Spikes, and it also helped that Zero Aura outruns Dragapult and can threaten it super effectively. That was very significant. It also just has great physical coverage, proving to be a consistent offensive threat that is easy to fit onto teams and just a good Pokemon in general. This guy is not in Gen 9, but I think if it was, it would be a viable choice in OU. Up next we have Victini, a mythical from Generation 5, and it's interesting, because if you put Victini and Hoopa Unbound, or some of these other ones, next to each other, you probably wouldn't expect Victini to be the one that was more competitively successful. It has a Psychic Fire typing, which is pretty bad defensively, especially for the Rock weakness, and it only has 100 base stats across the board, compared to Hoopa Unbound, who has great stats, and you would be surprised to learn that Victini has had a better career. Victini has access to one of the strongest moves of all time, V-Create, which has an absurd 180 base power, with the drawback of lowering your defensive stats and your speed by 1. Victini generally has a pretty nice move pool with access to Bolt Strike for electric coverage, U-Turn for pivoting, also has the ability Victory Star, which slightly increases the accuracy of moves by 1.1 times, making V-Create and Bolt Strike more accurate. Victini is an effective breaker, and it is famous for being able to just absolutely demolish anything if sun is up. Even resistances cannot come into a sun-boosted V-Create safely. It is not possible. The only recourse against such a thing is fire immunity from Pokemon like Heatran who have Flash Fire, but even they are threatened by options like Bolt Strike, which just does big neutral damage, or Brick Break, which is super effective. Victini has gotten more good options over the years too, with its Z-move Z Celebrate being a good one in Gen 7, which just boosts all of its stats by 1. It's a pretty nice win condition and a good use of your 1 per game Z-move, because Victini can take advantage of Stored Power and Searing Shot for special coverage on this set. And you can also chuck Mixed Coverage on there since it has 100 stats across the board. It is pretty versatile in what offensive options it wants to run. And in Gen 8, Victini benefited greatly from the addition of Boots, which allowed it to patch up that Rock weakness, and Victini is a solid Pokemon there as well. While Victini was pretty poor in the early generations, especially Gen 5, where Sun is the worst of the weather effects and Rock weakness is more damning, as time went on, Victini felt a bit better and has had a pretty good career in OU, honestly. I actually think in Gen 7 OU it was quite underrated as a really great wall breaker that punished some of the greedier teams, and even just gets a guaranteed KO against anything if you just get it on the field, and there's such value to that in my opinion. Up next we've got Volcanion, who is honestly kind of a hard Pokemon to evaluate. It's a pretty cool Pokemon, fire water typing, the ability Water Absorb, which is always useful, and good stats. For a good base 130 special attack, good defense, 70 base speed, obviously suffers from rock weakness, and a lowish base speed, but it's an effective wall breaker. Volcanion has the excellent signature move Steam Eruption as well, which is 110 power, 95 accuracy, and the Scald effect, 30% burn chance. It's a really excellent move, and pretty much the main reason this Pokemon is great in certain formats. Volcanion's ranked OU in Gen 6 where it debuted, and Gen 8, but those are the only 2 gens where it sees competitive relevance. In Gens 7 and 9 it is regrettably a lower tier choice. For that reason, I'd put it about here on the list, and I think that's fair for Volcanion. Up next is Keldeo, who also counts as a mythical Pokemon according to Bulbapedia. We learn something new every day, don't we? Keldeo, when it debuted in Gen 5, turned the metagame on its head. It was immediately successful as one of the top tier Pokemon in the format, with its fantastic rain-boosted Hydro Pumps with choice specs, absolutely demolishing everything on rain teams. Even on non-rain teams, this was just a potent offensive threat with its fantastic water fighting typing, which is great offensively and defensively, making it very consistent. It has solid bulk as a result, and the move Secret Sword is also excellent. It's a fighting type special attack that deals damage based on the enemy's defense rather than special defense, which makes Keldeo able to one-hit KO Blissey with a special attack. Keldeo's existence basically invalidated the best special wall in Pokemon history and made it significantly worse in Gen 5 OU. And it has had OU success for multiple generations. Keldeo unfortunately really suffered in Gen 7 because Katana was added to the game, who is, I think, 1 or 2 speed higher than Keldeo and can just one-hit KO it. So Katana basically ruined Keldeo's entire life, but some would say Keldeo deserved that for what he did to Blissey back in Gen 5. Katana was getting revenge. It's kind of funny though that Katana was seemingly designed to ruin Keldeo's entire life. It's 1 speed faster and just KOs it. I think that that's quite humorous. Yeah, I think Keldeo deserves the respect of this rank, a little bit higher than such fellows as Victini and Hoopa Unbound for its dominance in those metagames where it was a top tier choice. Up next, we have a Pokemon that unfortunately does exist, as much as I wish it didn't. It is Melmetal, a Pokemon that I find to be a hideous monstrosity that regrettably thrived in the Gen 8 OU metagame, its only generation where it is playable in. It was one of the better Pokemon in the format, a simple mono-steel type with excellent defensive bulk. I mean, ridiculous HP and defense stats. Also has 143 base attack, which is crazy. At least all of its other stats suck, with only 34 base speed, but the strength of its high stats made it a fantastic wall breaker. It also has the ability Iron Fist, granting more damage to punch-based attacks, which it has plenty of. And the worst part about this Pokemon is this move right here, Double Iron Bash. A 60 power attack that hits twice, and each hit has a 30% flinch chance. I don't think flinching is very fun, and this guy flinches you, and it's not very fun, is it? I don't support it. I suppose he has 2 hands with which to Iron Bash, but did he have to? Did he have to do it? I don't think so. I think he could have maybe a single Iron Bash at least. I've also learned that you apparently have to give Meltan 400 Meltan candies to evolve it into Melmetal, and 400 is a big number. I don't know if I'll ever be doing that in my life personally, so I probably will never see Melmetal in any legitimate capacity, and that can give me some comfort at the very least. Up next we have Jirachi, who has actually had quite a consistent competitive career since its debut in Gen 3. It had a strong start as one of Gen 3's best Pokemon, a versatile Pokemon that can be defensive or offensive, and with myriad options to choose from with offensive coverage and utility. In Gen 4, it was arguably the best Pokemon in OU, with its access to the new tool of Iron Head, which has a 60% flinch chance on it, one of the most devious moves in Pokemon history, boosted by that Serene Grace. And beyond that, it's just been solid. It was OU in Gen 5, 6, and 7. OU status from Gen 3 to 7 is impressive, I must say. In Gen 8 it fell down to UU, but it's still a reasonably viable choice in OUs, occasionally seen. And in Gen 9, it is ranked in RU, unfortunately falling down after many years of success. But considering that consistency, I think you gotta give Jirachi a pretty high position here. It is a formidable Pokemon, and it helps that it got good utility over the years like Stealth Rock and U-Turn that are just good and consistent options that make it more usable. Up next we have Mew, who is indeed a mythical. I always called this a legendary, but no, it's a mythical according to the geniuses at Bulbapedia. Mew is the first mythical, and perhaps the most iconic, maybe even my personal favorite. I've always been a fan of Mew because it is extremely versatile. Since Mew can learn any TM in the entire game, it is a clay to be molded into however you want. You can use it as an offensive threat, a utility Pokemon, a defensive wall, a stall breaker, a win condition, an aggressive exploder. It can be anything. And it of course had a role in Ubers from Gen 1 to 4. 4 generations straight of Ubers viability. In Gen 5 it dipped, being dethroned, and I believe it was UU actually in Gen 5, but from Gen 6 onwards it gained Defog, which was important utility, and it actually maintained its OU position despite how bad Psychic type got, and despite, you know, that Dark and Ghost weakness and even Bug weakness that are so crippling, as well as an ability that over time got more and more average, like Synchronize is not really up to par with some of the modern abilities, but still just the sheer versatility of Mew's options made it OU viable from Gen 6 to 8, which I think is respectable. And I would say in Gen 9 it's not even Mew's fault that it fell down so significantly, because it lost so many of its most important options. It no longer has any healing moves or defog or anything good, so there's no real reason to use it anymore. I think if it did have all those, it would be valuable still for role compression, you know, fitting something like Will-O-Wisp, healing, taunt, hazards, whatever status, whatever coverage you need, all in one is just really good and useful, and it feels like a great tool to have whenever you need something that to just fill your gaps, you chuck Mew on. So it's unfortunate that in Gen 9 Mew lost so many of its great options, but yeah, Mew is an overall very cool Pokemon in my opinion that I think is a great tool in the toolkit for any team builder. He's reliable, he's epic and iconic for a reason, with a simple and elegant design. Up next we've got Manaphy, another one of the more consistent mythicals throughout the series. Debuted in Generation 4 where it was ranked in Ubers, and it was a great Pokemon up there. It's a mono water type with the ability Hydration, which cures status ailments in the rain and can be used alongside Rest for a full heal that gets immediately cured. It's an outstanding ability on rain teams, and alongside Kyogre, this is an absolute beast. Manaphy is also known for its access to Tail Glow, a rare boosting move which grants +3 special attack, allowing you to very quickly ramp up and wall break with rain boosted Surfs. And you have the coverage of Ice Beam to back it up as well, so 100 base stats across the board makes you relatively bulky too. And this was Ubers in Gen 5 as well, where permanent weather still existed. From Gen 6 onwards, it fell down from Ubers, but it was a formidable presence in OU. Just setting rain manually itself was worthwhile, as it could cure your status and actually boost up your rain boosted surf damage, so that's useful. A good choice in Gen 7 with Z moves, as Waterium Z allowed it to wall break very effectively. At first in Gen 9 it was also OU viable once again, thriving with the new option Take Heart, which is just Calm Mind, but it also cures status, a fantastic move. I think Manaphy started to drop off in Gen 9 OU though when Raging Bolt was added to the game, and Raging Bolt really ruined Manaphy's life as a new unfortunate matchup. Manaphy at the present moment is ranked in RUBL in Generation 9, so an impressive career overall. Could also rise back up in Gen 9, we'll see. It still has some really valuable traits, great coverage, access to Tail Glow, and it's a good choice on aggressive teams, so could be useful in Gen 9 or maybe it'll rise back up, we'll see folks. There's still time for Manaphy. Up next, Mega Diancie, who is another hard Pokemon to evaluate because Mega's only existed for 2 generations, but in both of these generations, Mega Diancie is absolutely excellent. One of the best Pokemon to use your 1 per team Mega Stone on. Mega Diancie has excellent stats, 160 attack and special attack, great bulk, and 110 base speed. It's just fantastic all around. Magic Bounce is one of the best abilities in the game, bouncing back advantageous effects from the enemy's side, meaning they can't use Stealth Rock against you, it'll bounce back. Can't use spikes, any status ailments. It's just an outstanding ability, and Diancie Mega itself gets Stealth Rock, making it a great hazard-setting lead, preventing the enemy from making their hazards while you can make yours freely. It has excellent stab options with Moonblast for Fairy Stab and Diamond Storm. For mixed coverage, it's 100 power Rock-type attack, with a 50% chance to raise your defense by 2, which can seriously come in handy. You've got coverage like Earth Power. It's a very easy Pokemon to just chuck on a team and do well with. It can make up for the unfortunate Time Sword weaknesses to Steel and other weaknesses that Rock typing has just by being fast and threatening. With its outstanding offensive stats and above average speed, it can just hit things really hard. And Magic Bounce gives you mid-game value. You're going to make your opponent second guess themselves ever clicking hazards or status ailments because Mega Diancie could always just switch in and destroy them for it. It's an outstanding Pokemon. Up next is Deoxys Defense Form. And this is a Pokemon that is ranked Ubers in just about every generation, from Generation 3 to 8, which is impressive, but that being said, is not a very popular choice in Ubers throughout the years. The much more popular Deoxys attack form is preferred, and you can't run more than 1 Deoxys form on a team, so for that reason it is pretty uncommon to ever see Deoxys defense in Ubers formats. It's occasionally seen as a bulky Spikes and Stealth Rock setter, which has its value, but generally, especially in the modern generations, Mono Psychic is not a great defensive typing. And this is one of the few Deoxys forms that would eventually drop out of Ubers, and in Gen 9 it is actually ranked NUBL, which is pretty bad for a Deoxys form, and kind of insane to see. But it just goes to show that Psychic typing and the ability Pressure is not particularly fantastic anymore. Even in OU it's not popular. But despite excellent defensive stats, Power Creep is a real thing, and Deoxys defense doesn't cut it in today's world, unfortunately. But out of respect for, generations of Ubers rank, I think we put Deoxys defense above some of the other fellas on this list, but definitely the least impressive of the Deoxys forms. Up next I have put Marsh Shadow. This is a Pokemon that does not look as threatening as it is, but looks can be deceiving, folks. This is an excellent mythical Pokemon with the great Fighting Ghost typing. Fighting and Ghost have always been complementary types. They cover each other very well because, of course, normal types are immune to Ghost, but Fighting can hit them super effectively. Dark types also resist Ghost, but Fighting can hit them super effectively. It's a perfect type combination. It's also complementary because you're neutral to Dark instead of being weak to it, which is very valuable. Marshadow has good offensive stats as well, with 125 attack and speed. Average everything else, but all you need is those offensive stats on a Pokemon like this. On top of that, it's got the ability Technician, which is one of the best offensive abilities. Grants 1.5 times power to moves with 60 power or less, so you can crucially boost Shadow Sneak up to be a more powerful priority option. Always nice to have a good, strong priority move. You can even boost Hidden Power for mixed coverage, which comes up in Ubers, where there are Pokemon like Mega Salamence and Zygarde running around who are weak to ice. So you get a Technician boosted Hidden Power is pretty cool. And of course, Close Combat, fantastic stab. And the real kicker here is Spectral Thief. This move is nuts. Spectral Thief, 90 power, Ghost type attack. It's honestly pretty rare to get a Ghost type attack with this high of a base power that's physical. So that alone is pretty nice, but then the effect is unbelievable. It steals the target's boosts before dealing damage. So think of like a Xerneas. You're facing down a Xerneas. They attack you down to your focus sash, you use Spectral Thief. You steal all of their boosts and then hit them. So you actually hit them with an attack boost because you steal it first before dealing the damage. And then you have a Marshadow with 1 billion stats, and you can reverse sweep them by stealing their boosts while attacking at the same time. It's broken. It's crazy. You can even outplay priority users afterwards with Shadow Sneak. So Marshadow was a formidable foe in Gen 7 Ubers, and I played a lot of that metagame, and Marshadow can make things awkward for you, denying your sweep if it's up, and sometimes even just being difficult to deal with as an offensive threat beyond that. So I would give Marshadow a lot of respect. It only exists in Gen 7 and 8, but in both of these metas, it is a great Pokemon in Ubers, and I'm sure in Gen 9 that would be the same if it existed. Up next is Deoxys Speed, which is actually one of the more popular Deoxys forms to choose in various Ubers formats. Because it is a great hazard setting lead, it has high speed, as suggested by the name. 180 base speed is absurd. And unlike many of the other Deoxys forms, it has pretty okay defensive stats, so it can take some hits. And basically the idea is just to be fast and make hazards on the field, and then go to other Pokemon that benefit from the hazards being up. It's a simple and effective idea in competitive singles that has stood the test of time for the most part. Unfortunately though, in Gen 8, boots were added to the game. Well, depends who you ask if that's fortunate or unfortunate, but if you ask Deoxys Speed, it's unfortunate, because spamming hazards on the field became a worse strategy, as a simple item could just ignore hazards, making Deoxys Speed a bit less popular. In Generation 9, Deoxys Speed was the other Deoxys form to actually fall from Ubers down to OU, where it currently is good, but not that good. Not a top tier choice or anything. It can just be fast and click utility moves, basically. That's what it does. It creates hazards or creates dual screens, and sometimes that's good, but sometimes it's not particularly game-breaking or anything, is it? So even though Deoxys Speed has had an impressive career before this of just making hazards up in Ubers, the fact that it fell down from Ubers, I think, makes it a bit worse than the other Deoxys forms that exist. And in a similar vein, we have Darkrai, another mythical Pokemon. Darkrai debuted in Generation 4, where it was Ubers, of course. It has excellent offensive stats. 135 base special attack is great, and a formidable speed tier. And the most iconic thing about it, of course, was its access to the move Dark Void, an 80 power sleep-inflicting move back in the day, which is very strong, especially for how fast this is. It's unheard of at the time. And the ability Bad Dreams is also excellent to take advantage of that. Sleeping foes will lose 1/8 of their HP every turn, which adds a damage over time effect to sleep, making it even better. It's like you're sleeping and poisoning or burning them at the same time, which is very strong. Darkrai was excellent in Gen 4 Ubers. In fact, it's one of the central Pokemon that defines the lead metagame, because a lead Darkrai trying to set things to sleep is a common concept, and you need to be prepared for it. There's a Lumberry leads to play around it and other such things. Sometimes Darkrai runs a Choice Scarf just to be faster and hit Dark Void. There's all kinds of things like that. Later on in the franchise, though, Dark Void would be nerfed to only have 55 accuracy, making it significantly worse. Darkrai would then use Hypnosis instead as a sleep-inflicting move, which is far less accurate, making it less consistent as a Pokemon. And in fact, there are better sleep setters in Ubers that aren't Darkrai. And as an offensive threat, beyond being able to put things to sleep, it wasn't very desirable either in Ubers. So it kind of fell off after that nerf significantly. A lot of people are upset about that. Personally, I think that Darkrai was a pretty annoying Pokemon in Ubers. For the 80 accuracy sleep and a fast Pokemon is really strong and disruptive and annoying to deal with in my opinion. It did get nerfed for a funny reason, where Smeargle was abusing Dark Void in VGC. So they could have just prevented Smeargle from using it in VGC. But I am also alright with the collateral damage of Darkrai getting nerfed in singles because it was annoying. And then It fell down from Ubers to OU in Generation 9, which was kind of a historic moment. It now exists in OU and is a very good Pokemon in OU, but not the best either. And there was a whole debacle with Sleep and how a Darkrai could abuse Sleep in OU that I won't get into here, because I'm sick of talking about it, frankly. I'm sick of Pokemon drama. I'm beyond that. I talk about fun things instead. But yeah, Darkrai really relied on that accurate Sleep move to make it viable, and when it lost that, it kind of fell off. So there you go. But still respect to its years of Uber's ranking. Up next is Deoxys Normal, who is kind of a weird one because you never really use Deoxys Normal. Usually it's strictly worse than Deoxys Attack. Deoxys Normal has 150 attack, special attack, and speed, which is very good, and 50 in the defensive stats. The only time you ever use this is if you need the bulk for some very specific reason, because Deoxys Attack, of course, has higher attack and special attack, but lower defense. But sometimes you can live something specific, and that's where Deoxys Normal comes in. In Gen 3 Ubers, Deoxys Normal can be used to live Pursuit from certain things, because Deoxys Attack will just fall to even the weakest Pursuit, because it has no defenses. But Deoxys can live some Pursuits, which comes in handy. This particular Deoxys set here is in Gen 7 Ubers, it can actually lure in Marshadow and live Marshadow's Spectral Thief with a Cassib berry equipped. So that has its value, and you could Pursuit Trap them. Usually not a popular Deoxys form though, very, very niche. But I've put it above Darkrai because simply it's still ranked in Ubers in Gen 9. It's still Ubers in Gen 9 and Darkrai isn't. So I think that makes it slightly better. Up next is Shaman Sky, and they say that every dog has its day, but this is a dog that I wish didn't have its day, because this is a damn annoying Pokemon in Ubers. But you can't deny that it exists in Ubers for every single generation that it's been in, which is respectable. This guy has pretty good stats. He's got a grass flying typing, respectable offensive stats and speed, and has the ability Serene Grace, which we know from Jirachi. And what this guy does is you put a Choice Scarf on it so that it can attack first, and you put Air Slash, which has a 60% flinch chance, and you sort of just click that over and hope that the enemy gets flinched repeatedly, and sometimes that works. Most dogs that I've met in my life are honorable creatures. This is the only dishonorable dog I know of that I would prefer not to see on the battlefield, personally, if given the option. Up next is Genesect, a Pokemon that is ranked Ubers in every generation it exists in for clear reasons. It has the excellent Bug Steel typing, fantastic stats, great mixed attacking stats with 120 attack and special attack, myriad options on both sides of the attacking spectrum to take advantage of, Stab U-Turn being a great one, Ice Beam, Flamethrower, etc., and various physical moves as well. And also the ability Download, which on switch in raises attack or special attack by one stage based on the foe's weaker defensive stat. So if you've got someone who's got lower defense than special defense, you'll gain attack to punish them further. And that's pretty fantastic to get an offensive boost that is perfect for what you're facing against. Plus you can U-turn to pivot out and it's hard hitting, often attack boosted. It's a no-brainer why this is so powerful. In Generation 5 Ubers, it was a formidable foe. I think over the years it has sort of fallen off in Ubers specifically, with other steel types competing for its spot and it having less to offer as time went on. Definitely one of the better mythicals in the Pokemon universe, of course. Now up next is maybe a controversial take from Jim, but I would put Magearna above Genesect. It hasn't existed for as long and it is also ranked OU in one generation, Gen 7. However, despite being ranked OU in Gen 7, it is still one of the best Pokemon in Gen 7 Ubers. And in fact, part of the reason Genesect isn't seen as much is because Magearna is so much better to use on your teams with its fantastic Steel Fairy defensive typing, making it a great check to Yveltal and Xerneas in a general solid defensive pivot. Magearna is so excellent. Steel Fairy is perhaps the best typing in the entire game, with so many resistances, immunities, and so much defensive application, it's kind of insane. The ability Soul Heart goes nuts, raising special attack when another Pokemon faints. So you can snowball with this, use Shift Gear, use it as a sweeper. It's a prime abuser of Z moves in Gen 7. Its stats are very solid, of course, and in Gen 8 and 9 it is ranked in Ubers. Many people think it should have been banned to Ubers in Gen 7, and that was an oversight back in the day. I think that that's a valid opinion because Magearna is extremely dominant in Gen 7 OU, sweeping teams with ease, with its Shift Gear sets, being very difficult to stop when it starts snowballing, and very difficult to take out because of its excellent defensive traits. And defensively, it is also fantastic against common threats like Ash Greninja and Mega Alakazam and Tapu Lele. That's probably the reason it wasn't banned, because it is an important check to all those. And Gen 7's a very broken format where you need something like that. But then the problem is the Magearna itself is also one of the broken things in that format, isn't it? But yeah, even though it might not line up with my other logic, I feel like Magearna, based on vibes, is a stronger Pokemon than Genesect, folks. Up next is, of course, Deoxys attack form. The most popular and premier Deoxys form since the beginning, a defining Pokemon in its debut game of Generation 3 Ubers, a top tier choice there. And this is a concept that has seemed to stand the test of time. Just give a guy a lot of offensive stats and high speed, and it will remain relevant and viable in Ubers for generations to come. Even in Gen 9, with all the power creep that has occurred, Deoxys attack can still just outrun and hit things for big damage. It was kind of the original power creep, wasn't it? A min-maxed fellow. It is of course vulnerable to priority moves. With its pathetic defensive stats, it will die to a slight breeze, a simple extreme speed from anything, or a quick attack, or even a choice Scarfer that unexpectedly outruns Deoxys attack will do the trick, folks. A Quark Drive boosted Iron Treads or something like that could get there in Ubers. And anything that can live a hit can of course revenge KO it swiftly, but still, it's a potent threat. It has wide coverage, and sometimes that's the scariest thing about it. You don't know which attacking options it has. You don't know what it could KO. It could have Ice Beam or Thunderbolt or Low Kick as an example. It has offensive options on the physical and special side. So it can one-hit Miraidon with the Life Orb boost and Psycho boost. It can Rock Slide a Ho-Oh. It can do various things. It's a frightening Pokemon and an excellent one. And of course, number one on the list should come as no surprise. Arceus is in fact a mythical Pokemon, and it is by far the best in the entire series. In its debut game of Gen 4, Arceus was actually banned from Ubers to the Anything Goes tier, and from Gen 5 onwards it is a staple of Ubers in every generation. In Gen 9 it feels better than ever, receiving new options and the ability to terrestrialize. Arceus is an extremely customizable Pokemon with 120 base stats across the board, which is just truly excellent. Arceus can be a defensive wall, an offensive threat, special attacker, physical attacker, and anything in between. Hazard setting utility, whatever you want. It can be any type in the game because of its ability multi-type. Depending on what plate it is holding, it will transform into the corresponding type. This makes it even more customizable. You can make it whatever type you need to round out your team. Water is a common one for defensive sets. Ghost is a common one for offensive sets. You can also just maintain a normal type Arceus, allowing you to run whatever item you want, like Boots or Life Orb or Lumberry, to use this set right here, the Swords Dance Extreme Speed set, which is a popular way to use such a Pokemon. And this has evidently stood the test of time more than any other legendary or mythical ever, because it can just adapt to any metagame and thrive no matter what. I think that I would be surprised if we're in Gen 20 and Arceus is somehow unviable. There would have to be such power creep beyond anything imaginable for that to be the case, because Arceus is so inherently strong because of its versatility. It can be anything you want. It can mold to any shape imaginable. Even in the world where Groudon Primal existed, who was perhaps the strongest Ubers Pokemon in history, Arceus rose up to counteract Groudon Primal with its water sets that wall Groudon Primal, and Arceus Ground can threaten it with super effective Judgment and other such options. And in Gen 9, Uber's Arceus Ground also felt even better as Arceus gained Dragon Dance, and ground typing matches up well against Zacian Crowned and Miraidon. And I really like Arceus. I feel like it makes Ubers more dynamic and interesting. It's always useful to just be able to use an Arceus form that can solve whatever problem your team needs. You can get really creative with Arceus. Back in Gen 7 Ubers, I was experimenting with some wacko Arceus, like Arceus Ice, Arceus Grass, and they're not very good, but they can be surprisingly effective, and you can catch people off guard with unique Arceus options. Arceus Poison I experimented with a Z move it can check Xerneas. Back in Gen 7, that was funny. The Arceus is, solid, and it promotes creativity. It's a great Pokemon all around, in my opinion, and I enjoy it greatly. Out of all of these, it's probably my favorite, even though it's a boring answer as the best one. I think it, just design-wise, it is a great Pokemon that works no matter what. I think that's respectable and admirable, and it's fun to use. And there's my mythical Pokemon rankings, folks. Who is your favorite on this list? Let me know down below in the comments, and thank you for watching.